Well, good evening, folks. It's a pleasure to be back again, and welcome to the Maid of Stone Podcast. Latest issue we are going to focus on this week is going to be around the joys of touring. Either going to see your favourite band in a local venue, playing in your backyard in some cases, or travelling mile upon mile upon mile to actually work out the logistics of getting to see one of your favourite bands, and also the logistics of they getting to your town to be able to play as well. Now, 3 views exist, I think, on touring. And before we introduce the rest of the guys, I'll just set the scene as to what we want to look at tonight. You've got bands like Kiss, Poison, Queen, Led Zeppelin, more, sex, drugs, rock and roll, trashing hotel rooms, the tales of the road that are sort of ingrained in the rock and roll annals in history. There's the concept of what goes on tour stays on tour. Are we actually going to be able to talk about any of the juicy stuff this evening? Has anybody got stories that they'll actually admit to, or is it all hearsay? And, well, heresy could also be the other way of looking at it. But there we go. So we'll come back onto that. And also nowadays, looking at the effort and cost that's involved in touring anyway, is it the only way aspiring bands can actually make any money by going out on the road? What else is available for them? And to look at all of this, to get the lowdown on the reality of touring, we've got Chris, host from Maid of Stone, who's going to be giving his views on what it takes to bring the bands that he wants to see at the festival. We've got Pete giving his views, not only as a punter, but somebody who's out on tour himself as well on a regular basis. You've got myself giving my viewpoints from very much a punter and a writer's perspective. And our guest tonight, Josie O'Toole, drummer with the Hot Dam, if you recognise her. And also she's looking after bands like These Wicked Rivers on the management side as well. So guys, thank you very much for coming on this evening to do the latest podcast. And I'm going to throw this one out here to, let's start, Pete, with you. Touring, it can't be that easy, and you do it a fair bit.
Yeah, it's easy. Right, so Josie's in the room. She'll testify that little These Wicked Rivers thing. That she'll testify that it's a lot easier for me because it's literally just me and a mic, which makes a massive difference, right? And that's just kind of why I do stand up. Well, the other reason is I've got no talent, but doing a stand up thing is weird. Just me, it's you have to pick your gigs right, but it's literally just me. I on a train or a bus, so I have absolutely no equipment. So with that in mind, it's still quite difficult to get the right venues. You've still got to be quite careful. You've still got to plan it out. Touring, even on my tiny little tours I do, I just finished a tour. It was really small, only like 6 or 7 venues in cities, and even that is a hassle for trying to get the right dates, trying to get people to get back to you, trying to sort of work it out so you're not traveling all around the country. So as a one person, it's difficult. I couldn't imagine what it's like being in a band, especially a drummer. It is exceptionally difficult. And I was, since I've been in the game and on this level, I just look at any band and I just thought and I think the frustration is for me is, that's so negative already. It's not people on fit, and they don't know. Why would they know? They say, "Oh, why don't you play this gig? Why don't you play this town? Why don't you play this town?" And it's like an iceberg, isn't it? It's so difficult to do. You've got so many sort of dots in the eyes and stuff to do. So for me, it's relatively easy, but it's just me, and it's not easy, but compared to a band, it is.
Literally, presumably your kit is a microphone and a holdall with your wash gear in and the change clothes.
I'm Scottish. I didn't even wash. To any Scottish listeners and viewers, I apologise. No, yeah, literally, it is a spare pair of pants, a few woolly hats. Even now, I'm an idiot, right? So, the only thing I've got to sell, apart from my soul, is my books. And I have to get my own books on Amazon. So I have to buy them on Amazon first and sell them. I know, it's a pain. And every single time, I've just done it. So I've got a gig on Thursday, and I've just done the same. Every time I order them, I always order them on Amazon too late. So while I'm at my gig, I get a message from Amazon saying, "You've delivered your package." But I've only got some books. And of course, I think with bands and stuff, they must have merch and everything. So yeah, it is literally me, a few books, a pair of pants, and a few cans of Diet Coke.
And Josie, for you, I mean, you've been you've played with multiple bands over the year. As we were saying before we started this evening, I saw you when you were drumming for Tequila Mockingbird as well. And I know you've played these tiny venues. Does it all start off with somebody's dad's estate car where you can pile as much in as possible and you all sleep in the car, or you get one room in a cheap hotel between, say, the four of you or something? Or is there a little bit more flexibility than that?
I mean, everyone's story is different. But I think quite a lot of the ones who go on to kind of do it long term will start off at school, whatever, trying to get their first gigs, local pub, whatever. I remember I was lucky my dad had a people carrier, and I'd managed to persuade him occasionally to lug all our gear into his people carrier to the local pub on a Saturday night. And you know, as you go through life, I think it's kind of like a conveyor belt that people kind of drop off along the way. Some people play in bands at schools and it's great fun on the weekend, feeling like a rock star when you're 16, going and playing Stereophonics covers at the local pub, and all your friends there with their Bacardi breezers, thinking that's living. It was back then, to be fair, good times. And then, but then a lot of people drop off when they go to uni. They decide that that's not really something they want to put their time, money, and effort into moving forwards, because I think, as you kind of scale up, things get easier in some ways, but they also get a lot harder in some ways. When you're starting out as a drummer, it's actually the best instrument to play, because when you're starting out, most gigs are kind of kit share. You use the headline band's kit, or the venue has some crappy house kit you play. So the drummer actually has it easy because you just need to take your cymbals and your snare drum and you're away. But then as you kind of progress, that's when that kind of stuff happens less and less. And then suddenly you've got a drum kit to take with you everywhere you go. Yeah, I mean, some people keep it going at uni, then some people don't, and then you get into your 20s. Some people keep it going. Some people decide actually trying to do this alongside building a career, trying to, have a meaningful, lasting relationship, trying to do things like save money towards a house. It's really, really difficult, because I see music as, for a lot of people, it's a hobby. Even at really quite surprising levels, it is a hobby. And it's a bit like somebody who likes fishing at the weekend. They might spend all their weekends doing it and put all their money into buying the latest fishing rod or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's something they love doing. And they're probably never going to make any money out of it. But I think the difficulty with music is that it takes up so much of your life to kind of try and do it properly, in terms of writing the songs, rehearsing together, recording, all of the things you need to be doing to kind of be considered a band that's actually pushing or trying to, make a difference, or whatever the band's trying to do. And then obviously it's weekend after weekend away. And it's really quite surprising in this day and age how big a band needs to be for it to be a job. So it's kind of like a race against time in a way, because I think most bands go through a completely unsustainable period of essentially working a full-time job whilst playing in a full-time band. And it's kind of like waiting for something to give, or something to break, or some kind of glimmer of hope, because I think most humans only have a certain amount of time in them of being able to do it at that intensity, because you're at a point where you want to say yes to every show you get offered, but at the same time you've only got X days of annual leave if you're trying to hold down a full-time job. And most people are in the position that they need to do that. And it was very interesting, that article in The Guardian the other week about the working class can't afford it. And it's tragic that is the case, to an extent. I wouldn't say it's necessarily just about the working class, but it's also about what support systems you've got around you. So I know for a fact I wouldn't still be here doing this if and the Hot Damn potentially wouldn't be here doing what we're doing if we weren't so lucky that my mum has a spare room that we can store all our merch and gear in at her house, and there's a spare bedroom so that every time we get together to rehearse, there's a place for the girls to crash afterwards, because we don't live particularly close to each other. So and not everybody has that. You know, if we had to pay for a travel lodge every single time we needed to do a rehearsal and had to pay for a unit to store all our merch in, I don't know how, I don't know if we could do it, because no one's at a point in their life where they've kind of got, you know, that kind of spare money floating around. And as is, we're lucky to break even as is. So if you then factored into the equation not having things like that, you know, the bando where I managed These Wicked Rivers for years, they were very, very lucky in that Dan, the drummer's parents, traveled with them, well, just went to every single show they played and sold their merch for them. So for them, that was huge, because it meant they didn't have to pay for a merch person for every single show, and a hotel, and, you know, a space in the van for that person, you know. And there's definitely a point where bands are kind of growing, that without some really supportive people around the band, if you had to pay market rates for everything that you need as a band to succeed, you'd need to have a serious trust fund behind you.
Good grief. So there's an element of beg, borrow, and steal across the board then to be able to get, and that's even for a band like yourselves, where you're a known name, you're a known commodity. And I mean, yes, you've got your debut album coming out later this year, but the four of you have come from a place where you've come from known bands, people are aware of you, and it's not like they see your name on the bill and go, well, who's that? You're a known commodity, aren't you?
Well, within the rock world, but I think, you know, the rock world is quite a small niche in this day and age. And, you know, it's an amazing and beautiful thing at the UK and the rock scene that we have. But the economics of it all are still very dubious, you know, and it does rely on a lot of people doing a lot for love, or a lot of bands, you know, even if they're playing early on a bill and getting 100 quid, 200 quid, you know, and you'll find, you know, certain festivals or, you know, tours or whatever, £100, £200 is a very usual fee for even a fairly established band, if you're playing under bigger names, and they kind of rely on you saying yes to that, and selling lots of merch. And I don't think it's necessarily because anyone's trying to profiteer or rip anybody off. But when you look at actually the economics of it all, you can't, you know, the promoters or whatever can't afford to pay the bands more than that. So you're kind of relying on people paying their own petrol to get to the gig, or paying for their own travel lodge that night. Because even if you're just a 4-piece with no crew, trying to get 2 travel lodge rooms and cover people's petrol to play a show that's a 3-hour drive away, that can be 300, 400 quid quite easily for a 200 quid fee. And, you know, when you're young and just kind of having fun and not really thinking about money, that, you know, you see that as your Saturday night out. You see, you know, putting that money into the band as just part of your kind of entertainment budget. But I think as you get a bit on in life a bit, you have other priorities and other commitments that mean that you're not necessarily in a position to put that aside. So it's almost like a race for your band to grow, you know, in line with your other, you know, other areas of your life, so that it can be sustainable. Because I think for a lot of people it just becomes unsustainable. Their wife and kids start to say to him, look, come on, this is a glorified hobby, and we haven't seen you for 40 weeks out of 52 weekends.
Ouch. That's quite a harsh reality, isn't it, for aspiring bands to take on board, I suppose.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I'm not trying to be all doom and gloom here. I think at the end of the day, if you love what you do, it doesn't feel like a hardship. And if you've got supportive people around you who kind of understand what you're doing and share your passion, it's a lot easier. But, you know, if people have got, I don't blame people's partners at all. If you've got young kids at home and your partner is away pretty much every weekend, if not playing a show, rehearsing, or in the studio recording, you're going to really start to question what you're doing. Because most people, they work a job they hate Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And the weekend they want to spend it with people they want to spend it with, doing the thing they love. So if you're in a band, great, you know, sometimes, you know, you just like a day off, but at the same time, if where I always think, where would you rather be? If there's nowhere you'd rather be, and you're, in a different city every weekend playing a show, then what's the hardship? I think it's harder when you've got other commitments, and other kind of life goals that may or may not be compatible with putting the hours and hours you need to put in, and the graft, because a lot of it is just connections and knowing people. It's definitely a business where it's who you know. There's not a textbook you can read or a bullet point list of ways to make your band get bigger quicker. There's things you can do to help yourself along the way, but getting out there and living it is really, I think, what it comes down to.
Pete, for something as simple as you say, for you going out on tour where there's minimal cost as far as kit and also merch, presumably you've still got to have the connections to actually make your tour dates up and come up with everything, find the gaps and book it all.
Yeah, and also as well, it's of recent times, I think just was absolutely spot on. If there's no place you'd rather be. No, I think I've gone through a stage maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I was doing stand-up a lot more, that I was aiming for the next thing. I wanted the next the next tour is going to be bigger, the next venue is going to be bigger. Now I'm very fortunate. Now I know there's no money in it on my side of it anyway. So I kind of go, well, actually, on this Saturday, I'm off to Liverpool now, and there's going to be a couple hundred people there. How lucky is that? For me, it's an absolute privilege. I've kind of jammed my way into the music world, as you all know. So I always feel really privileged on it. But absolutely. So I've just done the last tour, and I've done it now. So I did Epsom and I did Glasgow, and I did it. So my cities that my mates lived in, so we kind of crash on sofas. You could kind of get bums on seats a bit easier. But you can only do that so long. But if you don't do that, you're in a right hole. It's hard, isn't it? I mean, you play in a city that no one's heard of you. You just don't know where to begin. Without that machine behind you, you don't even know how do you start advertising in these places these days. And it is tough, and Facebook and social media is fantastic for it to a certain extent, but you need to have that kind of knowledge. So I did Epsom, Glasgow, Brighton, London. I always do London because you live there for so long. But the places I used to live, I know of people. So you have to have that knowledge, and you have to have that. And people are saying things like, "Oh God, why don't you play Hull? Or why don't you play like Ipswich?" And you can't really say, "Well, I don't know anybody there," or "I've got no idea." And these guys recommend venues, which is fantastic and wonderful, but you need to have that background knowledge. Well, you don't need to have it, but it helps. So it definitely is like I said, it couldn't be easier for me, but it still costs a fortune. I don't drive, so still getting trains or buses or coaches or travel lodges. I think people forget how expensive the whole thing is. And I'm not. Most comics will just drive everywhere and sleep in the car or ride all night, and that's fantastic. But like for me, I just want to enjoy it and have a good time, and so I don't tour as much as I should. But yeah.
And if you aren't known in a city, presumably, then your fallback is if those cities have got venues that are known for comedy, like London, the Comedy Store, things like that, presumably.
Yeah, but I think for me, I'm not so much out the comedy circuit. I think like anything, you've got to get your foot in the door, and getting the foot in the door, you've got to work it. For the last 4, 5, 6 years, I've been in the music scene, and sounds a bit thing, but a lot of people. I've had two messages saying, "Yeah, it's easy for you. You're supporting Toby Jefferson." No, it's who you know, and you kind of want to say, "Yeah, but who you know." You get to know these people by hard work. It's working, isn't it? So I think you've got to be known there, and we say you've got to know it, and you've got to go in. And we've all seen bands. Josie, I don't know how times I've seen you at festivals or gigs you're not playing, but kind of checking it out. And you wouldn't say I'm doing my research, but you're there and thereabout. I don't think I've ever gone to a gig where I don't see you there, and that in a nice way. Do you know what I mean?
Well, it's where would you rather be? I'm very fortunate to have opportunities / excuses to go to lots of festivals all the time. And would I rather do that or sit on my bum picking my nose on the weekend? So and it all kind of it's a lifestyle, and I think that's what people don't realize, is that it's not a job for a lot of people. First and foremost, it's not a hobby, it's a lifestyle, and you've kind of, you've got to be the kind of person who wants it as a lifestyle.
Yeah.
If you want to get somewhere in it, I think, because that you've just got to throw yourself into it 24/7.
And that's it.
If you want to climb.
Yeah. You can't just phone it in, can you? You can't just go, I'm just going to pick and choose. And in a way, you pick and choose gigs, but when you do a gig, and I know absolutely with everyone, you're exactly the same. When you're at a gig or doing a gig, you're 100% in it. You're 100% there. And yeah, you can't just, certain people aren't suited for that lifestyle. I think some people are, but it is exhausting, but lovely exhausting. Yeah. I'd much rather do that than sit and watch Wheel of Fortune on TV for 10 hours.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird. I had my first weekend off without any kind of band/work commitments for the first time this year, I think, last weekend. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know what to do with myself. I'm not used to like having to think about how to fill my day, because normally it's kind of set out for me. And I was so productive. I blew up 2 lawnmowers. And
did you sit in rock and roll style, blow them up with inflatable? Is that a new thing for the hot damn lawnmowers on stage?
It was way less fun than that. They just started making funny noises, and then I looked at it and it was melted. That's what happens when you're away so much. You don't get to mow your lawn until it's like that high. And
how rock and roll are you? That's the most rock and roll I've ever heard. You've blown up 2 lawnmowers.
Yeah. Proud of that. So it's a very expensive weekend, really, considering I didn't leave the house.
Yeah, but there's a future single in that, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I know what you mean about the weekend. I've got this. I had this weekend free, and I was actually quite looking forward to it. But actually, that's the thing, isn't it? It's one of these things, isn't it? We're very. I know it's hard work. It's very hard graft. I think we're very privileged to be on that scene and get the opportunities that many people dream of, but they can't get into it, or they don't know how. So yeah,
it's a good problem to have. That's what I always remind myself.
I'm sure it is. It is. Chris, you see this from almost the other side of the coin, don't you? Because you presumably have to look for artists with gaps in their touring itinerary to be able to pick them up for festivals.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I have to do is try and work out a band's availability, which is not as always as easy as you might think. Some agents are very forthcoming about it, some not so much. But yeah, I mean, trying to find someone that's at least going to be in Europe is the first port of call. And then either trying to attach yourself onto a tour or trying to get an element of it's not so much a fly-in, but kind of like routed in from wherever the European festivals they're playing. That's the kind of main crux of it. But then even then, I might find out that a band are doing 3 or 4 dates in the UK. I then have to work out if it's worth us being just another one, another part of that without any element of exclusivity, because at the end of the day, there aren't that many festivals where we are, but we're not far from London. So if a band's going to come in and do a 2,000-3,000 cap in London, is it worth me trying to drag them down to Maidstone? And obviously the fee has to kind of reflect that a lot of my punters might be already seeing them. So yeah, it's tricky in that sense, but I mean, it has to be. I can't, for the most part, be flying bands in from the US or anywhere else in the world for one-off shows. So I have to be part of that kind of touring train.
Which must be quite difficult, as you say, to juggle it. Because I mean, take Mr. Big, who you've got as one of the headliners this year. They've obviously already done a show at Shepherd's Bush Empire, and you've still got them. But there's a decent block of time in terms of the gap, isn't there, between when they played, and also you're getting a lot closer to the last shows they're ever going to play as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, Mr. Big it completely came out of the blue. I hadn't even considered them because I believed they were doing their farewell UK shows 3-4 months beforehand. And I'm just speaking to the agent, and he said, "Oh, well, Mr. Big are coming back. This is the fee. What do you think?" And I was like, "Absolutely. It's exactly the kind of thing that we'd need." And then we worked out that obviously we would be sharing them with another festival, which is fine, because the fee wasn't wasn't crazy. And potentially another couple of shows up north. But again, the agent was very clear with me on that. So we're not going to come back and do London again, or potentially anything else in the south. So that one came out of nowhere. I kind of, thank my lucky stars for that one. They're not always as easy as that with an agent just springing up that their big band are coming back.
You have got an exclusive one because we've got Wolfmother coming over, haven't we, this year? And I don't think anybody else has got them, and they're not even touring.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, that was I actually instigated that one. I had no idea if Wolfmother had any dreams of. I think I had my eye on them last year, and they did a festival in Czechoslovakia or somewhere around there, the Harley Davidson one, and they did one date in the UK, I think, last year. So they were kind of in the back of my mind, but I had no idea what their plans were. But yeah, when I spoke to the agent, I got the feeling that he was looking at European festival dates, and those are the best for me, really. If they're doing 3 or 4 dates in Europe, and I've always got my eye on who's at sort of Wacken into, because obviously Wacken tends to announce quite early.
Yeah.
They tend to have, as the most part, heavier bands than we would potentially look at, but there is some crossover. So I noticed the Warning were there very early on this year. So I spent kind of 6 months chasing them to make sure we got them kind of routed in. But yeah, once I heard that, well, we figured out that Wolfmother were going to be in Europe, that was just a no-brainer that we were trying to get the UK date. I didn't force any kind of exclusivity on it, but again, the agent was very upfront about what they may or may not do. And as of this moment now, I don't think they have any other plans. So we didn't look for exclusivity, but it's looking fairly exclusive now. Touch wood. I'm sure he's going to announce 20 dates by the time this podcast gets edited. Goes out.
There are presumably conversations that have to happen both with bands and festival organisers, because I mean, Josie, presumably bands like the concept of, our only UK festival appearance because it sounds very grand, but you do also then lose out potentially on a tour as well.
Absolutely. Like it's always just a balancing act, really, because the less you play in a way, the more people will come to your shows. But at the same time, so you can play maybe a more prestigious slot on a festival or a bigger, better venue. But at the same time, there's also for bands on the up, a big pressure to kind of get out and play for more people, make yourself more accessible. Because when people don't really know who you are, they're certainly not going to be traveling to the other side of the country for your only date. So you kind of want to go and try and play in as many people's back gardens as possible.
Yeah.
And it's kind of just a balancing act, because ideally you'd be playing every night, every night of the year, winning over new fans every single night. But obviously balancing that with real life and the confines with the fact that most bands at the level I'm working at are still working full time, most of the members. So you've got X amount of annual leave to spend, and you've got to spend it, on the best 20 shows you can that year, really. So it's, a lot of people will be like, oh, well, you come and play this charity gig on Friday night, blah, blah, blah. So I'll cover your petrol. And it's like, well, it's not just the cost of the petrol that you're talking about there. It's an opportunity cost, because if you can only take 20 days off work to play shows and they need to take a day off work, that's one show out of their calendar they can't do that year that could be an amazing festival slot for them, or an important part of a tour or whatever. So yeah, it's always just a juggling act to work out. I see some bands that get too picky too soon, in my opinion. They start being like, oh, we've had a little bit of success, so we're going to be quite snobby about what we say yes to now. It needs to pay this amount, or needs to be supporting a band that's at least this big. And if it's not, we're not doing it. And then you see a lot of them just sitting around not playing any shows at all, because the chances of getting those opportunities are few and far between. And actually, the more you play, the more those opportunities sometimes come about, because as we discussed, it's a lot about who you know. So if you're playing a show that you were kind of umming and ahhing about whether you should play it or not, often those are the ones that there's somebody in the audience that ends up booking you for something else or refers you on to somebody else. So, sometimes it is really just best to, if you think that you've got a chance to kind of get out and convert some more fans to be on your team, you're best off just getting out and doing it. And then obviously as you kind of ascend the ladder, you do have to get a bit more selective with what you say yes to. But it's definitely striking a balancing act between not being too snobby too soon and not overplaying, because if people just think they can see you every day, everywhere, it's not a special thing, and your pull will really suffer, and then you're not attractive to promoters or to festivals or anyone.
Is there a magic number that seems to work, do you think, for artists, where when they're looking at merch sales and things like that, there's an X pounds per head that you always want to make at a gig that you play, whether it's a fiver per head in the crowd or something like that, that makes it then you think, well, that was a worthwhile gig?
I mean, for me and for, for me and the bands I work with, most of the time, you'll say yes to a show if you think you're going to enjoy it, if you think it's playing to a crowd that's going to enjoy us, and if we think we can, at least cover our costs, because sometimes you get offered an opportunity where it's a support slot. And like I said, you might get a support slot playing 500 to 1,000 cap venues, and it might be £100 support fee. So obviously when you've got a van to hire, 150 quid a day minimum, 3 or 4 travel lodge rooms, and that's putting, 2 or 3 people in each room, petrol, for £100 support slot, you're going to need to be doing £1,000 a night minimum on merch to make that work out. So you want to, I mean, I know a lot of people do think per head. I normally think of it in terms of what are our costs of doing this show, and can we make this work financially? And if you think you're going to run at a loss, is it a worthwhile loss that you're going to run it at? And have you got some kind of income source elsewhere or other things planned that's going to kind of subsidize doing this major opportunity show at a loss? We all of the bands I work with across Rock People Management, like one of the things we really, really hone in on is merch selection and availability, because without that, your band's not sustainable. We try and make it as easy as possible for the bands to grow, so that when they get to a point where having a tech, for example, is important, suddenly you've got to pay for an extra hotel room and pay a tech. The band needs that to not come from their own pocket. That needs to come from the band's funds. So you need to kind of make sure the band is scaling up and covering its costs as it scales up. And I think merch is really, really important. And, most fans do understand how difficult it is and how important that is. And I think if you give the fans an amazing experience and an amazing show and have some lovely merch that they actually want to buy, not as a pity purchase, but because it's something that's compelling that they want to take home with them as a little memento of the show. It's so, so important. It breaks my heart when I see bands go on tour with like 1 box of CDs and three t-shirts of each size in a little box. And I'm like, how if you're serious about your band, it's just not going to be sustainable, because you're going to get to the end of the tour and someone's going to have 2 or 3 grand on their credit card that no one's going to be able to pay back. And 2 or 3 grand is light, actually. Even quite low level tours, you're talking about 20 grand of investment. So between the gig fee and the merch, it needs to pay that back.
Wow.
Unless you've got some kind of angel investing or whatever. But even that, like, it's not really respected if you're just getting kind of handouts and stuff. I think if you're a band that's good, you can make it work, but it's certainly not easy.
And the old days where you could sell thousands upon thousands of records, cassettes, LPs and whatever, obviously that's gone. Vinyl's made a comeback to a degree, but presumably the cost of producing those now outweighs the money you can make on them.
Well, yeah, I mean, CD sales obviously aren't what they used to be, and streaming royalties are well documented as not really being significant at all unless you're like in the millions and millions of streams. Vinyl has made a comeback, and that's great news. But yeah, absolutely, I think it's for a lot of emerging bands, it's really difficult to front the cost of producing that vinyl in the first place, because you've got to kind of really produce 300 units for it to be cost effective. So you're looking at a few grand up front, and a band that's starting out, you've got to build your fan base to a point that you're actually going to sell a few hundred in the first place, before you go and kind of launch all that stuff, really, because otherwise you've spent all of your spare cash on something that's going to take you years to shift. So it's really kind of a delicate act of kind of like building your fan base and giving them access to your music, and kind of trying to bring people on the journey with you and keeping people's interest and engagement while you build the fan base to a point that you can actually viably do an album campaign. That's one of the reasons the Hot Damns album's taken so long to come along. We were very fortunate in that when we launched the new band, the fans of our previous bands, Tequila Mockingbird and the Amorettes, a lot of them gave us the time of day and were kind of open to listening to it and seeing whether this next chapter was something they wanted to be part of. But even then, we were still essentially starting from scratch. So we needed to kind of build that fan base and build kind of proof of that fan base existing to a point where we could kind of either pitch to a label who would have the confidence that they weren't going to lose millions of pounds to us, well, not millions, but thousands, or that we were at a point, if it was going to be a self-release, that we're at a point where we think we're actually going to sell enough that we're not going to just get ourselves in a big financial black hole by pre-selling stuff and not being able to afford to actually press it.
Blimey.
It's funny, isn't it? Because you don't even think about these things. But I know I mentioned a band, but they do festivals, and I said to a band once, "Oh my God, most people are wearing your t-shirts. This really good thing." And the band member was lovely, but he looked at me and went, "That's really great, but that means I'm not going to buy a new t-shirt." And and it didn't mean it in a horrible way, but I thought, actually, you forget how fragile it is. That balance and act of love, because absolutely, fans are the most important thing, and giving the fans everything they deserve and want, and great. But at the same time, it's such a fragile business, isn't it? You've got to make money, you've got to eat, you've got to pay the cost back somehow. And it's always a bit of an imbalance.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And the favors that we talked about that are absolutely crucial in the beginning stages of a band, they run out eventually. You get to a point where you are touring more and more. You can't just be sleeping on people's floors all the time. I mean, as you get older, it gets less and less of a thing that you actually want to spend your weekend doing if you're not even sure you're going to get a bed. And so, the cost of touring as you go along does increase. And, whereas your mate might have designed you a logo for free to begin with, when you're getting to a point where you're putting it on t-shirts and selling it on merch, you kind of have to then enlist a designer and pay for the copyright and all of that kind of jazz. So yeah, I think that's why, and like you said, merch is so important. And I know what you mean about if people have already got your t-shirt, but I feel like as long as you keep your merch fresh and interesting, like we often do. I mean, so it's much easier to just get one amazing design and get 1,000 of them printed and then just sell them and not have to worry about restocking all the time or getting a new design that everyone agrees on. But what we find is that most of the time it's the same people buying, and it's almost like every single time you put out a new t-shirt, maybe 50% of the people who buy it bought your last t-shirt. So you've got to keep the merch table fresh because people want to spend money on the band. At no point does anyone ever beg them. Well, that's not true. The Hot Damn, we definitely beg people. It's all in jest. At no point do we hope we ever really pressure anyone to. It's there if people want it, and you've just got to keep it enticing and appealing. So as much as it's a bit annoying to have to recommission designs all the time and pay a couple of quid more, £2-3 more sometimes on the piece rate because you're getting 50 done instead of 500, I think that in terms of cash flow, it actually pays off for a band at a certain level.
Is it not a big investment for a band going out on tour, though, Joe? I mean, you're obviously going to want to go out with more than 10 or 20 shirts. So is it realistic for a lot of bands to put in, what, 5, 6, 10 grand of merch off the bat?
I mean, you should be doubling your money on your merch if you do it right. So if you can guesstimate, it's guesstimation, but if you can guesstimate how many you're going to sell and the size curve of, what your punters are going to buy, because that's another thing, you end up with 500 double XLs left and nothing in any other size if you get it wrong, which is extremely frustrating. But it's all a learning thing, and it's not, and bands sometimes ask me, oh, what do you suggest we get? And I'm like, well, every band has a different size curve, there's a general rock one, but even like when Rivers went to Europe recently, the size curve for Europe was different to the size curve in the UK. So yeah, it's a bit difficult, but I would say most bands, if you're going on tour and you're saying you don't want to buy more merch because you don't have the money for it, like that's such a false economy. You're spending all this money on doing the tour in terms of the van hire and the hotels and everything else that you need. To not your merch is your one variable income stream. Your gig fee generally will be fixed. There might be a bit of upside if you sell really well, but generally you know what you're doing with your gig fee. Generally, unless you're quite a big band, that doesn't even cover your costs of hotels and van hire. So your only chance of coming home not in the red is investing in merch and ordering a sensible amount. Yeah, because you don't want to order loads, because then it's all going to be tied up in the merch and you're not actually going to have paid yourself back by the end of the tour. You want to just try and get it right. And, the more you do it, the more you kind of get a gauge for how many of this and that and this that you'll sell. And again, it comes down to relationships. You build good relationships with your merch suppliers and you will find some of them will let you pay them at the end of the tour. Obviously, that relies on you being an honest, trustworthy human. And even if you can't pay them back at the end of the tour, finding a way of paying them back at the end of the tour. Because if someone's done you a favor, you don't let them suffer if you made a mistake. But yeah, I mean, it's really about ducking and diving as much as possible and building good, strong, genuine relationships, and actually treating people well, so that when you do need a favor off somebody, they're more inclined to do it. But you obviously can't take the piss with that either, because if you're always just taking and taking and taking, there gets a point when people get a bit sick of you.
I do think on this with the merch, I think it's a two-way thing, isn't it, with the merch? Because fans love merch, and I think these days people go to a gig and they want that memory of it. I think it's quite important, and why not? Good on them. So I think you're doing them, and I feel sometimes if you go to a gig, and I know I've heard people say this quite often, and I think I feel the same. If you go to a gig you really enjoy and they're not selling merch, you kind of feel a little bit shortchanged. You don't have to buy it, do you? You don't have to buy it, but the option's there, and I think merch is really important for that fan base as well. I think you feel, what it's like. I think the first thing is Maid of Stone. The first thing people will do is they'll go to the merch t-shirt and they'll buy a Maid of Stone t-shirt. They love that memory. So I think the merch is really important on that side as well. I know it's really hard to do, but I think as a fan, you like having that option to buy something.
Well, I think it's a lot more than just maybe, the £7 profit or something a band might make from a t-shirt. It's actually, I think, about them taking a little piece of the band home with them.
Absolutely.
I think, if someone buys a t-shirt, I feel like, I've got no statistics to prove this, but my gut instinct says that person is 5 times more likely to come to your gig next time you're in town, because every time they wash that t-shirt and hang the t-shirt out, they remember that gig and that memory and the fact that they loved it enough to put their hand in their pocket and buy that t-shirt. So, I think it's a massive missed opportunity, not just financially, but just almost more of a long-term kind of fan engagement thing, because it's about building that army of super fans.
Yeah.
There's a number, I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it's 1,000 super fans. If you manage to generate 1,000 super fans, you've got a band that's a full-time band. But that's
when you do a gig, when you've got the merch stand, the people, they want to buy a t-shirt, they want to buy stuff. but they want to see you, they want to meet you, they want to have that personal experience, and it's lovely because people remember that. And it's I know it's difficult. The bigger you get, it's harder to do, but you've always got that T-shirt, and that, yeah, you're right. A T-shirt at a gig means more than a T-shirt at a gig.
Yeah,
it's not like buying a T-shirt in a shop. It means a lot more. I agree.
Exactly. I think that people have a lot more of an emotional connection if they're bored at a gig they've been to, as opposed to go on, eBay and buy one off there or off Amazon or whatever. It's just it feels different.
Yeah,
that comes at a bit of a premium though with certain bands at certain levels. When you go to the gig and you find the shirts are 50, 60 pound, and you've queued for 30 minutes, and there's no, obviously I'm talking the level where, not what Josie was talking about, where you can actually meet the band and have a chat, and you may even get something signed. I mean, that's kind of priceless, and that's what I love about going to the merch stand at small shows. But at the bigger shows, especially when you look at the same Gildan Soft T-shirt that you bought for 20 quid with the band, all of a sudden it's now 60 quid because it's being sold at the O2. I think you lose the disconnect there.
I was going to buy a Kiss T-shirt, but I'll probably, on the last tour, but I'll probably get one next year when the tour again.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know enough about the kind of economics of, say, stadium level shows to really make an informed opinion. I mean, I know that they charge concessions that can easily be 25% plus VAT, so essentially 30%. And I suppose there's probably a lot more people taking, a bite of the pie at that level. But it's hard to know whether it's just complete profiteering. I mean, it could be that the band have sold off their merch rights and they actually have no say in it whatsoever. They've sold off their merch rights, and then you've got somebody who's, maybe a venture capitalist who just sees it as a commodity now, and how much can I put this on the market for and sell it for to maximize my profit? I think sometimes it goes that way, which is a shame for true fans, that means they're paying 55, 60 pounds for a T-shirt. I would, even, we've had to put our prices up because the cost of manufacturing T-shirts has doubled since COVID. So, whereas before it was a decent margin product at £15, it's not now, especially if you've got a few colours and a front and a back print. And, as much as we would love to just give everybody a T-shirt at every show, we love our fans, we couldn't do any of this without them. But at the same time, we couldn't do any of this without selling them T-shirts either, because it's literally that at this level that is your hope of even breaking even. We've never taken a penny out of the band. The only time I've ever made any money playing in a band is when I was depping for the Amorettes and our flight got cancelled. And it was when we were part of the European Union. So if your flight gets cancelled, you automatically are eligible for like €200 compensation. So we all claimed €200 because our flight was delayed for more than 6 hours or whatever it was. And we all kept that compensation. And to this day, this is the only time we've ever been paid for a show. Because everything else has to go back into the band pot to help fund the next video, fund whatever's next, or even, just to have a bit of cash in the bank so that when your next tour comes along, you have to pay for the van hire up front. So you might need $3,000 to pay for the van hire before you even start the tour. So you can kind of always need that buffer there. And if you haven't got that buffer there, that's when life gets really tricky, because that's when people need to start putting money in from their own pocket. And not everybody is at a position in life where they've got 500 quid lying around that they can put into the band account to make ends meet. That your kind of propensity for doing those things as you do it longer and longer probably wanes, and people get kind of tied up with other things in their lives that mean they're not in a position to do that.
So going to the Guardian piece that you mentioned, it sounds like it possibly could be possible for working class people to be in the band and tour. But ideally, it suits working class people working in jobs where they are paid quite well and they have a little bit of, disposable income. They can kind of chip into the band pot to kind of kick it going, keep it going, and start invest in the merch, start the whole kind of process.
Yeah, I think having a little bit of a buffer to begin with so that you can kind of start from, let me rephrase this. Having that obviously will help. I don't think it's impossible to do it without, but it's definitely harder. You've got to be good at lots of things. If you can kind of pull in favors, a mate who'll design a logo for you and design some merch from you, and someone who doesn't mind you keeping boxes of merch in their house or storing your gear there, or somewhere you can rehearse for cheap or free, or someone who lets you use their van on the weekends when you're starting out. Because when you're starting out, you're not getting paid 180 quid for a gig, you're getting 50 quid for a gig. So you can't hire a splitter. So everyone take their own vehicles. Well, then you spend 180 quid on 5 lots of petrol. You kind of can't win. So obviously, if you're from a background where there's some money behind you, stuff like that would be easier. But I think long term, you've kind of just got to have the staying power. I mean, I think people who really, really want it will find a way to do it. But it is worrying when you read stories about, when it says that the working class can't afford it, because what a horrible situation we're in if some of the most talented people have to give up because they haven't got an economic buffer to fall back on. Like I said, I mean, I feel myself very privileged because I have had the fact that somebody has been willing to put up with all of the band's shit in their house, when no one else is in a position to store it. And we certainly weren't in a position to pay for a storage unit. And even like when I came over to the UK originally, with Tequila Mockingbird, I wasn't working for a while because we had so many like shows on and off. But again, we weren't taking any money out of the band pot. So it's not like it was kind of paying for our day-to-day existence. But because I'd worked in a corporate job in Australia and worked really, really hard for a few years and lived like a pauper and saved every single penny when everyone else was buying fancy handbags and fancy cars, I was putting that all into a rainy day fund in case Tequila Mockingbird got to do a world tour. And, lo and behold, we had the opportunity to come over here. I kind of bankrolled the band to an extent, where if there was upfront expenses that needed to be paid and the money wasn't in the account, then I was in a position to put some of my savings in to mean that we could buy all the merch we wanted for the tour and didn't have to kind of shoot ourselves in the foot by only taking t-shirts and CDs because we just didn't have the money to kind of, forward plan in that way. So, it's a tricky one. And I really hope that, things change. I mean, it was quite eye-opening. I've been on the road with These Wicked Rivers in Europe for 2.5 weeks earlier this month, and no, last month. I forget what day it is. But it was fascinating seeing how things are over there, because it was the first time they've toured over there, and there were between, I'd say, 100 and 300 people at every show they went to, and I was like, this is mental. Like, they've spent 10 years kind of building that in the UK. How come they can go to Europe and it's already and it's kind of the same there as it is in the UK already? How has this happened? And like, the more I spoke to promoters and venues and stuff, there's a lot more government funding and arts support over there. So even things like the fact that the venues all have kitchens and will cook you a proper meal. So you're not scrambling around between sound check and doors trying to find a Greggs sausage roll or whatever. You actually eat like a human being when you're on the road, which actually meant no one got sick, which is, again, better for the punters, better for everyone. The band enjoys it more. They're going to put on a better show for the punters if everybody's not exhausted and ill by the end of the tour. But the fact that the government kind of recognizes the value of the arts. There was one show they did that was sold out, and basically the government had essentially put on the show and kept everything really, really reasonable. And they kind of do it as a support, a kind of a mental health support thing, as in, let's just give people in this town lots of culture and lots of amazing things to do. And they kind of fund it from from the cultural / mental health support budget. And I just think it really got me thinking about why is it that it doesn't make sense in the UK? Why is it that these bands put so much effort into building the band for 10 years to a point that they can sell 300 tickets and walk away not even breaking even? And that venue is sold out and everybody else in the chain is paid for their time. Not, not loads, but paid for their time. And the band can conceivably walk away not earning a penny and even running at a loss if their merch isn't on point. And I think I don't know that much about museums and things like that, but I would find it very interesting if music was kind of treated the same as maybe some of the other arts are, in that if there was kind of a recognition of the cultural importance of music, because some things are just never going to turn a profit. I'm not sure museums turn a profit necessarily. The cost of the footprint, maintaining the displays, the exhibits, they're usually run by very knowledgeable people who are experts in their fields. Like, maybe there's benefactors who leave them loads of money or something. I don't know enough about it really, but I really think the UK needs some love from the government and some recognition of how happy, it doesn't even need to be a lot. If they put, say, £2,000 into a venue per week to put on one government supported show, that meant that a band that wouldn't normally play there might play there, or you can reduce the ticket price by £5 a ticket or whatever it is, I feel like that would actually give a lot of benefits to that town and to the people who kind of attend it.
Does the government money go directly into the venues, do you know, in Europe, or is it elsewhere?
I think they sponsor certain shows or certain programs, or, it's a government run venue. Some of them are kind of like attached to art centres.
Sure.
So therefore, it's not really run looking to make a profit. In the UK, the promoter needs to make a profit, the band needs to make a profit, the bar needs to make a profit. Whereas if basically the government own the venue and don't charge venue hire because they're going to make some money over the bar when 300 people rock up at the venue, then they can kind of, put on an event and it all kind of stack up a lot better. I mean, I think in France, as long as you play a certain number of shows a year, you can essentially go on kind of a universal support system. If you're a working musician, the government actually recognizes that as an occupation that needs support and will pay you a very basic kind of stipend so that you can exist as a musician, which is just light years away from where we are in the UK. And, we wonder why people have such kind of mental health trouble, especially within music. And I'm like, because you're asking the impossible of people a lot of the time, or you're asking them to be amazing at so many things and feel like they're failing at most of them most of the time as well. I mean, even if you're a really mentally strong person, that will take its toll. And the thing is, a lot of creatives aren't necessarily the most mentally strong people to begin with. So it's a bit of a recipe for problems.
You mentioned as well the piece about the super fans, because even with your 1,000 that you mentioned, you can't rely on them forever because people's situations changes, don't you? Yeah. And they can be the biggest fan in the world of yours, but if their financial situation changes, that they effectively drop off from what they can do to support you, don't they, as well? So it's a fine line between being able to have them as your support mechanism and, as you say, not actually getting any support from elsewhere in the industry, be it the government or whoever.
Absolutely. And I think, another point that article made was that every bit of the music industry assumes that you're making money from the other bit of the music industry. Like, there's all this talk of bands need to tour to make money, but like, it's really, you really are touring at quite a high level before you're making money from touring. You're certainly not really making anything meaningful from streaming. Online merch sales is helpful, but again, it's not going to mean anybody can quit their day job anytime soon unless you're at a serious level. And yeah, touring, is often touted as the only chance for bands to make money. And I think a few years ago, maybe it was a bit easier, but even when To Kill a Mockingbird came over here, you could easily hire a splitter for 80 quid a day. nowadays you're lucky to get one for less than 150 quid a day, you know, and your fees haven't increased. You know, the opening slot fee back then was 50 quid for a gig. It's still 50 quid for a gig, you know. So back then when a splitter was 80 quid and an opening slot fee was 50 quid, you'd be like, okay, as long as we sell a bit of merch, we might be all right here. You know, and it's like nothing's really changed in terms of any income stream for the bands, yet their outgoings have increased and increased and increased. And this, I think, is the problem ultimately, is that in any other industry, you would say, I'm not doing this. I'm a plumber. The cost of my pipes has doubled in 5 years. So my new price is this price. Pay it, or I'm not changing your U-bend unless you pay me 500 quid, because that's how much it's going to cost me to do my job. Whereas in music, because people love it and they do it for love first and foremost, and they have spent probably 10 years doing it for love, by the time they get to a point that it might not be for love anymore, it might be because it's actually got to a point where it can/needs to be their career. If you say to a guitarist, you're never going to get paid for playing guitar again in your life, they're not going to quit guitar. Whereas if you say to a plumber, you're never going to get paid for changing another U-bend, they're never going to change another U-bend again. So you're kind of ripe for exploitation in a way, because if everybody kind of stands firm and says, nah, you're not getting paid that, your choice is, well, don't play at all, or play and continue to lose money. And I feel like I don't know at what point it's been failed. Like, I mean, I personally think that gig tickets are too cheap. And I think that might be part of the problem, is that you think about how much you spend to go to the cinema now to see a mass-produced movie that doesn't really require that much. You know, obviously making the movie costs a lot, but in the movie theatre, you're lucky if there's even one human being, member of staff in there these days, and you'll pay easily 20 quid for your ticket, another 20 quid for some popcorn and a drink, and that's barely an exaggeration. Yet, you know, sometimes I say to a promoter, you know, let's go for a £17 ticket, and they'll be like, no, £13. And then you take off that, the booking fee, you take off that VAT, and then suddenly you're getting £8 net. Even if you're selling 200 of them, it doesn't leave a lot to play with. Once you've played for venue hire, marketing, sound people, towel hire, you know, the bands have to pay for their rider. People think, oh, you get all this free beer. No, it comes out of the venue costings, and you're left with whatever's left at the end.
I absolutely think the £12-15 a ticket for a gig, 1986, they should be 30. You know, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I just think, you know, and CDs when I was 18, 500 million years ago, were £12.99. If you wanted like a double disc, now 64 or whatever it was, £12.99 was a very, very normal price to pay for a CD. But so was 25p for a packet of Walker's Crisps. A packet of Walker's Crisps now, you're looking at £1 minimum. And a CD is still £12.99. So it's like all the revenue streams have not increased in line with all the costs. And I'm not quite sure why. And I think it's partly because maybe musicians are generally pure creatives who aren't in it for the money. And that is a beautiful thing about music, but it also leaves them massively ripe for exploitation, because, you know, there's not really the market forces that are at play everywhere else we look in life. Everything else has gone up so much, yet your gig tickets haven't really gone up, even because the argument is, well, cost of living, we want to keep them affordable, which absolutely we do. The last thing I want to do is take such an important thing away from people who are struggling the most. Absolutely not. But at the same time, how is it right that every single other thing on this planet has doubled in cost pretty much over the last few years, and music has stayed exactly where it is?
And everything else, even on that level. So I understand people go to gigs regularly. People go to football regularly. I've got a Port Vale season ticket. That would still cost 20, 23, £24 a game. And that's cheap. Right, that's cheap. So surely the gig on a Saturday night after the game should be not half that amount. But it is, you know what I mean? You're absolutely right. I think we need to make gigs more expensive.
I think that only works at a certain level, though. Am I wrong here, Josie? Because one thing we've been talking about recently is bands a bit further up the chain. Their fees have massively increased since COVID.
Oh,
You know that.
100%. Yeah.
You obviously know a lot of promoters yourself, and prices are massively gone up. I mean, there's a band in London next week doing an Academy show, and they're 75 quid a ticket.
Yeah.
The last Academy show I went to was about £40 a ticket. So
Yeah.
it's definitely jumping. I think it's just a shame that that isn't reflected further on down the ladder.
Yeah.
And I know I mean, when I start out planning it the next year, I've got a budget. I'll have a budget per slot, and obviously everything is variable, negotiable, and it all moves around. But if a band I really want wants X amount more than I have, sort of put aside for them or budgeted for them, that money's going to come from somewhere else, and I have to start shaving that off the other slots.
Yeah.
I think it's a shame.
Yeah.
I know for a fact that we don't underpay. In fact, we overpay for them more than a lot more of the festivals would do. But we believe in that. I mean, even the smallest bands on our stage, even ones that have gone through competitions, we'll pay them twice what they would get anywhere else. Because I don't want to see, as you say, bands funding their own petrol to come down to Maidstone and be completely out of pocket just for the chance. But it is tough. But at that level above, those costs have definitely gone up.
Well, I think the difference there is that the market forces do come into play, because then you're talking about bands that are full-time professional bands with, agents and managers and all of that working for them, and, often international as well. And it's like, you can't argue with the fact that your flights are now this much, so you're going to have to cover that kind of thing. I think maybe, I'm probably speaking more to the grassroots level where everything else kind of has definitely gone up. I think at grassroots there's actually been quite a lot of pressure to keep it where it was, which I absolutely admire. That I think it's really important that music is accessible, but at the end of the day, it's not like everybody's taken a hit. I feel like it's the band has disproportionately taken a hit, in that the van hire companies have put their prices up. Oh, our costs have gone up. And the merch manufacturers have put their prices up. Oh, Gildan have put their prices up, so we have to, and the venue has put their prices up. Oh, minimum wage has gone up, so we need to pay our security staff more. Yet, because it's the band that's always paid last, everybody else takes their little bit extra that's, fairly, everybody needs to be paid. But it's just difficult when, at the end of the day, the pot hasn't expanded. So, and everybody's taking more out of it, meaning there's even less left there, even less left in it for the bands. And the bands are stuck between a rock and a hard place, because they love doing it. They need to be doing it. Their primary motivation is not money. But I think to make it a sustainable long-term thing, at some point, if you want the headliners of tomorrow to exist, these bands need to go from being hobby bands to being full-time artists. And that doesn't happen overnight. But at the moment, it feels like it's very, very hard to kind of build that to a point that you're a full-time artist. And
what's the solution? Can we finish on some suggestions of what we could all do across our various parts of the industry and as punters ourselves?
I think there needs to be some lobbying of the government. I feel like music, everyone always says, oh, the government doesn't care about musicians. It doesn't care about music. It never will. It never has. I feel like there's a really strong argument to be made to the government for caring about music. And, you need to talk to them in their language, though. It needs somebody who understands the music industry, understands politics to an extent, and can persuade the government that they will save money by investing in music. Because I genuinely, treating mental illness at the moment is a massive, massive problem, and causes a lot of unproductivity for the country. It causes a lot of problems for the very overburdened NHS. A lot of people may be claiming universal credit because they're not in a position to work right now, because they're not in a great place. I think music for a lot of people has kind of replaced the sense of meaning that religion maybe once gave people, and that kind of community and togetherness. And I think if the government saw it as a financially sensible thing to invest in, if they could maybe reduce their budgets elsewhere in treating the result of a load of people feeling, quite frankly, crap about their lives, if you can kind of help build a community and something meaningful that people enjoy and want to take part in, you might actually find that they don't need to spend so much money on solving some of the other problems that the country has. And if they saw it more like how they see the other arts and, put a bit of funding, and it's not going to work for everybody. A very controversial opinion. There are a lot of really crap bands out there that never will be more than hobby bands. And I don't think that this applies to them. If people want to play music, they should be entitled to play music. Whether or not you should expect anyone to come and see you play music is another matter, But if you want to express yourself by playing music, you should do that 100% till the cows come home. But not every band has necessarily got the songs or the work ethic or the drive to kind of take something from something they love doing to being something that you can kind of commercialize because it's something other people love. Because it's one thing loving it yourself, it's another thing if actually other people love what you're doing, so you can actually turn this into a business and turn it into something with a bit more longevity. So I think a bit of government support to kind of make it less difficult for people who've got real potential. And, the grants process, I know there's grants available, but from everything I've seen, it's quite clicky and it's more about box ticking. Do you have a project that sounds like it floats lots of councillors' boats, or is it actually something that's going to make a difference? Obviously, fans that do, I think, a lot at the moment anyway. Buying merch 100% is a massively important way to support bands. And in terms of the industry, I mean, there's certain promoters that screw bands over, and I think there needs to be more of a united stance amongst artists, management, and fans. When you hear of people not being treated fairly, I think that you're kind of part of the problem if you carry on supporting that, if you know full well that that happens regularly. Because bands, like I said, they can't help themselves sometimes. They love playing, and therefore they're open to exploitation. But I just think there needs to be a little bit more regulation and a bit more community mindedness about
bands feel, don't they, if they want to say something, they want to rebel against that, or not rebel, they want to stop, but if they feel they're going to be blacklisted, or they feel they're going to be put on. I was thinking, Josie, are you busy are you busy in October at all? How's your October looking? Because the Prime Minister job going, and you'd be pretty good at it.
This is the problem. I don't think anyone who'd be good at politics wants to do politics anymore.
Josie, leave us on a high point here. Obviously, you're still making music. You've got your debut album with the band coming out in September. You're still playing live gigs as well. Other than the cash side of things, it's got to be because of the passion. There's got to be the passion there, hasn't there?
100%. Like, it's a really amazing thing to be part of. And, I wouldn't change it for the world. I wouldn't still be here doing it if I didn't love it. None of us would be. I'm sorry if I've made it sound a bit miserable and doom and gloom. But there's an amazing scene in the UK. And I think just knowing what it means to other people as well, like genuinely people I used to work a job that I really didn't enjoy, and music used to be my thing that I'd look forward to at the weekend. And, the thing that gave you something to keep you going when you were having a really shit day or week or month. So to be part of actually creating that thing that means so much to so many people's lives, and you see them beaming when they come out of a show and absolutely over the moon, and has taken their mind off whatever other crap that's happening in their life right then. That's such an honor to be part of that, and to never feel like it's actually work. It always just feels like, something that's a really fun, worthwhile thing to do. And I think the UK is a lot easier in the UK than other places, to be honest. Having been done it in Australia, where you've got 5 cities, 12 hours drive apart. Don't even get me started on the economics trying to make that work, which is the reason I'm back in the UK now, you know, because when we came over here, it was like, okay, wow, there's a really, really cool thing going here, you know, and it's, you know, it may not be perfect. Nothing in life is perfect. But it does seem to be a really healthy thing, and it seems to be getting bigger and better over time, despite all of the challenges everybody's throwing at it. It does still seem to be building and growing, and I think the cream does seem to be rising. The good eggs, I feel like, are coming to the fore, and the bad eggs are kind of being weeded out to an extent, because eventually word spreads, and if you've treated people like a not a nice person, you know, doors get closed to you. So it's a really cool thing to be part of, and thank you for having me to rabbit on this evening.
It's been fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us. Josie, as we close up on here, tell us a little bit about what's coming up from the band. New album is coming out when?
27th of September. Dancing on the Milky Way finally lands on planet Earth. It's been a while in the making, which is for a number of reasons. But I think ultimately we didn't want to put anything out that we weren't at least as proud of as our previous projects. You know, we all worked very hard on our respective previous projects, the Amorettes, the Tequila Mockingbird, and obviously Laurie in her band with her brother Aaron Buchanan and the Cult Classics, and Lizzie in various bands, including New Device. Like, I think we all kind of, if we're gonna be doing this, we do it properly. Otherwise, what was the point in starting again? So we kind of, we needed, and I think people think that writing good songs, you just shit them out in the shower. Sorry if I'm not allowed to swear. You know, writing good songs, they don't necessarily just happen. You know, and building a set, we didn't want to have to rely on the material of the old bands. We wanted to be able to play a set as the Hot Damn, and each song kind of stand up in its own right, and people not being like, why aren't you playing Let the Neighbors Call the Cops? Why aren't you playing I Smell Rock and Roll? So I think we can all hand on heart say that we've got it to a point where we can play the new album live front to back, except for one song that we've never played live together yet. And hand on heart be able to say we genuinely feel like we don't miss the old material, and that each song has earned its place on that CD or on that stage. And yeah, it's finally ready. So
well, good luck. Good luck. Looking forward to hearing that when it comes out, definitely. Pete, you're on tour at the moment.
I've got, it's not my own tour. I've got 4 dates with Toby Jefferson, which is exciting. 4 dates now. There was 3 dates about 20 minutes ago, but I was 4 dates. So 10 minutes goes out. I've done Liverpool, done Blackpool, which is great, and I've got London and Wolverhampton. And yeah, that's it for the company just now. And then I've got a few festivals. Walk them all, Maid of Stone. Exciting times, exciting summer ahead.
Wrapping up then from me as well, folks. Thank you very much for this podcast again. It has always been great fun. Chris, Pete, Josie, wonderful talking to you all. Check out our stuff through Powerplay Magazine and also myglobalmind.com, where you'll see reviews of the upcoming festivals as well, and probably a review of Josie's new album. But that'll be in a couple of months' time, I guess. But folks, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, and we'll see you at the next one.